Why would anyone hire a dishwasher to play at the conservatory's centennial gala? That was the question Marcus Riley asked, loud enough for the entire reception hall to hear, when the program coordinator suggested it. His friends laughed. The kind of laugh that doesn't need a punchline, because the joke is a person standing in the room. The person standing in the room was Emmanuel Okafor. He was 34 years old, Nigerian-Canadian, and for the past 11 months he had been clearing plates and washing crystal stemware in the back kitchen of the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto. He wore the same white uniform every shift. He kept his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He did not speak unless spoken to, and almost nobody spoke to him. What nobody in that reception hall knew, except for one person who was not yet in the room, was that Emmanuel Okafor had performed at Carnegie Hall at the age of 22. That his hands, the same hands that lifted dirty plates from linen tablecloths and stacked them in the industrial sink, had once drawn a standing ovation from 1,200 people in New York City on a Tuesday night in October. That a critic from the Globe and Mail had written in 2014 that Emmanuel Okafor played the piano the way certain people pray, with the entire body, with no part of the self held back. He had stopped playing in public 9 years ago, for reasons that were not music's fault. He had come back to music the only way he could find, through the service entrance, at 4 in the afternoon, with a mop. The conservatory's centennial gala was the largest event in the institution's 100-year history. 400 guests, the Prime Minister's cultural attaché, 2 governors general, patrons who had donated enough money to have practice rooms named after their grandmothers. The event had been 18 months in planning. The program included a student showcase, a string quartet commissioned specifically for the occasion, and a keynote performance by Marcus Riley, 26, the conservatory's most celebrated current faculty member and the winner of the Leeds International Piano Competition the previous spring. Marcus had a gift. Everyone said so, including Marcus. He wore it the way certain men wear expensive watches, not to tell time, but to make sure you noticed. The program coordinator, a quiet woman named Patricia Huang, had approached the evening's planning committee with a single suggestion 3 weeks before the gala. She had heard Emmanuel play in the empty recital hall at 2 in the morning. On a night, she stayed late to file program notes. She had stood in the corridor for 22 minutes without moving. When it was over, she had walked home in the December cold without her coat because she had forgotten it on her chair and couldn't bring herself to go back in and break what she had just heard. Her suggestion was simple: 1 piece. Give the dishwasher 1 piece. Marcus Riley had laughed for the first time when she raised it in the meeting. He laughed again now, in the reception hall, in front of the sponsors and the deansons and the guests who had flown in from Vancouver and Montreal and London. "Patricia," he said, with the particular patience of someone who does not feel patience is warranted, "this is not a talent show. This is not a charity evening. The Centennial Gala is a statement about what this institution stands for. And what it stands for is excellence." He paused. "Not good intentions." Patricia did not respond. She had learned that certain arguments are not won in the room where they start. Emmanuel Okafor heard none of this. He was in the kitchen, polishing the last of the reception flutes, and he was thinking about his father. Emmanuel Okafor had been a music teacher in Lagos for 31 years. He taught piano out of a 2-room school on the east side of the city, where the benches were second-hand church pews, and the single upright piano had a D-sharp that stuck in humid weather. He had 40 students at any given time, ranging from age 6 to 17, and he charged each of them what their family could afford, which, for many families, was nothing at all. He was not famous. He was not affiliated with any conservatory or academy. He had never performed at Carnegie Hall or anywhere like it, What Emmanuel Okafor had was a method, a way of teaching music that began not with notes but with breathing. He believed that the body learned music before the fingers did. That phrasing came from the diaphragm, that a student who understood how to breathe a phrase could play it correctly before their hands knew the keys. He had taught Daniel everything. Every night for 11 years, 4 hours a night, Emmanuel had sat beside his son on that second-hand church pew and worked through Chopin, through Bach, through Ravel, through the complete Beethoven sonatas twice. When Daniel earned a scholarship to the Royal Conservatory at 20, Emmanuel had driven him to the airport in a borrowed car, pressed a photograph into his hand, and said the same thing he had said at the end of every lesson for 11 years. Play because the music needs you, not because the room does. Emmanuel died of a cardiac event in 2019 in the two-room school on the east side of Lagos at the end of a Tuesday lesson. His last student, a 12-year-old girl named Adaeze, had been working through a Debussy prelude. She said later that he had smiled at the end of the phrase the way he always did when a student found something true, and then he was gone. Daniel had not performed publicly since the day he got the phone call. He had tried twice in the years that followed, once in a small recital hall in Kitchener, once at a friend's home in the annex. Both times he had sat at the piano and felt nothing come through his hands. Not silence, something worse than silence. An absence that had the shape of his father's voice and none of its warmth. He had taken the kitchen job because it was near the piano. He told himself he would figure the rest out. 11 months later, he was still figuring. The gala began at 7. Daniel was on shift until 9, clearing the reception hour. Then the dinner service. Then the small plates that came with the champagne toast before the performances began. He moved through the room the way he always did, efficiently, quietly, without making eye contact, because eye contact, in his experience, created obligations he didn't have the energy for. He did not expect the evening to be different from any other evening. That is, the particular grace of low expectations. They can still be shattered. At 8:40, Marcus Riley walked into the kitchen. This did not happen. Faculty did not walk into the kitchen at galas. That was not how galas worked. Daniel turned from the sink and found himself looking at a man in a black Tom Ford jacket, champagne in hand. Expression arranged into something that was not quite friendliness. "You're the piano guy," Marcus said. "The one Patricia wants to put on the program." Daniel dried his hands on a clean cloth. He said nothing. "I'm not trying to be cruel," Marcus said, in the tone of a man who has decided in advance that he isn't. "I'm trying to explain something about this institution that Patricia doesn't seem to understand. The conservatory has a reputation. People flew in from 3 countries tonight. They came to hear music at a certain level. Not." He glanced at the kitchen, at the sink, at the white uniform. Not a sympathy performance. Daniel set down the cloth. "Who asked you to explain that?" Marcus's expression shifted slightly. "No one. I'm explaining it as a professional courtesy." "Is that what this is?" It wasn't a question. Marcus seemed to recognize that and recalibrated. "Look, I'm sure you're good. I'm sure the kitchen staff enjoyed it. But this is the Centennial Gala. This is 100 years of this institution's legacy in one room." He raised the champagne glass slightly, as if toasting the concept. "Play elsewhere. Play somewhere appropriate. Tonight isn't the night." He left without waiting for an answer, which is the specific luxury of a man who has never needed to wait for one. Daniel stood in the kitchen for a long moment. Then he turned back to the sink. At 9:15, the string quartet finished their commissioned piece to extended applause. At 9:20, the cultural attaché gave a brief address. At 9:30, Patricia Huang walked into the kitchen, pale and moving quickly. "The Fazioli is tuned," she said. The Steinway is also tuned, if you prefer the Steinway. You have 10 minutes between the address and Marcus's set. It will be announced as a special addition to the program. She stopped. I'm asking without permission. I'm asking you directly. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. In the pocket of his white jacket against his chest was a photograph. It had been there every shift for 11 months. A tall man in a white shirt, standing at the door of a two-room school in Lagos. Squinting into the sun, smiling the way a man smiles when he has just heard something true. One piece, Daniel said. Patricia nodded. One piece. The Steinway. She nodded again. She was already turning for the door. Daniel took off the white jacket. Under it was a white dress shirt, which he had begun wearing every shift 11 months ago, for reasons he had not examined closely until now. He folded the jacket carefully and placed it on the steel counter. He rolled his sleeves down and buttoned them. He did not look at himself in any reflective surface, because there was no version of himself he needed to present to this room. There was only the music, and the music would know what it needed. He walked out of the kitchen through the service corridor and into the wing beside the stage. He could hear the tail end of the attaché's remarks through the curtain. He could hear the particular quality of silence in the hall. 400 people who had eaten and drunk well and were feeling pleased with themselves and with the evening. The easiest kind of room in the world, or the hardest, depending on what you were carrying when you walked into it. Marcus Rayleigh was standing in the wing, 15 feet away, waiting for his introduction. He turned when he heard footsteps and saw Daniel in the white dress shirt, and something moved across his face that was not quite surprise and not quite contempt. Something between the two that had not yet decided which direction to travel. "What are you doing?" Marcus said. It was not a question any more than Daniel's had been. Patricia appeared from the other side of the wing. She spoke quietly to the stage manager, who nodded, who spoke quietly to the program director, who adjusted something on a clipboard and walked to the microphone. "Before our featured performance this evening," the program director said into 400 attentive faces, "we have a brief special edition. Please welcome to the Fazioli." She glanced at her clipboard, Emmanuel Okafor. Polite applause, the kind reserved for things people have not been told to be excited about. Marcus took one step forward. "This is not on the program." Patricia turned to face him. She was 5'3", and she had been at the conservatory for 19 years. "Marcus," she said, "I know." And she said it in the specific tone of a woman who has already decided what matters more. Daniel walked on stage. The Fazioli Concert Grand stood at the center of the stage under a single overhead light, a 9-foot instrument the conservatory had acquired in 2018 and treated with the specific reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. Daniel pulled out the bench, adjusted it 2 inches forward, and sat down. He did not acknowledge the audience. He did not arrange his face into any performance of readiness. He placed his hands on his thighs, palms down, and he breathed 1 breath. 2. The third breath came from the diaphragm, the way his father had taught him, the way his father had said, the music started before the fingers, in the place where the body keeps everything it has ever understood about grief and time and love, and the specific impossibility of keeping anything you love. He placed his hands on the keys. He played the Ravel, Gaspard de la Nuit, the first movement, Ondine, a piece that begins like water moving in moonlight, not turbulent, not violent, but possessed of a particular terrible clarity, the clarity of something that cannot be stopped and does not need to be. The first 2 bars produced a silence in the hall that was different from the silence before them, the difference between a room that is quiet and a room that has stopped. A woman, at table 12, set down her champagne glass very carefully as if setting it down too quickly might break something that had nothing to do with glass. At table 4, a 73-year-old man who had been a faculty member at the conservatory from 1979 to 2008, who had heard Paolini play this piece in Milan in 1991, who had not expected to hear anything tonight he had not already heard in some form before, found himself gripping the edge of the tablecloth. Daniel played the way his father had taught him, which was not the way the conservatory taught it, which was not the way Marcus Riley played it, which was not the way almost anyone alive played it. He played it the way a man plays music he has been keeping inside for 5 years, which is to say he played it as if the music were not a performance but a door, and he was on one side of it, and his father was on the other, and the only way through was the phrase, and then the next phrase, and then the next. The piece is 12 minutes long. In those 12 minutes, the reception hall of the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto, on the occasion of its 100th anniversary, became a different kind of place than it had been before he sat down. In the wing, Marcus Riley stood without moving. His champagne was still in his hand. He had not raised it in 4 minutes. His jaw was set in the specific way of a man who knows he is hearing something he cannot dismiss and has not yet decided what to do with that knowledge. Patricia Huang stood beside the curtain, with her hands pressed flat against each other in front of her mouth. She did not close her eyes. She watched. Backstage, behind the service corridor, 2 kitchen staff had pushed the door open 2 inches and were listening through the gap. Daniel reached the final movement. The water motif returned, higher in the register now, with the particular bittersweet insistence of something that has come back to tell you something it couldn't say the first time. His father had played this movement for him once, on the old upright in Lagos with the stuck D sharp, and had said afterward, without looking up from the keys, "When you play this piece in public someday, play the ending for whoever you've lost. The music will know where to send it." He played the ending. When the last note resolved and lifted and was gone, the hall was silent for 4 full seconds. Then the woman at table 12 stood up. Then the man who had heard Paolini in Milan. Then the program director, who had been standing at the back of the room with her clipboard lowered to her side, not knowing when she had lowered it. The applause started at different points around the room and converged into something that did not sound like ordinary applause. It sounded like relief, like the specific feeling of a room full of people who have been reminded of why they cared about music in the first place, before careers and competitions and centennial galas entered the picture and made caring about music into a matter of institutional prestige. It did not stop for 3 minutes. Daniel sat at the piano. He did not stand immediately. His right hand was still resting on the keys, and the smallest tremor, the first and only moment of visible feeling he had shown during the entire performance, passed through his shoulders. He pressed his hand flat against the fallboard for one breath. Then he stood. In the wing, Marcus Riley set his champagne glass down on a side table. He stood there for a moment, and then he did something that nobody who knew him would have predicted. He walked on stage. Not to the microphone, not to the front of the stage. He walked to where Daniel was standing, and he extended his hand. "Who taught you?" Marcus said. His voice was different from what it had been in the kitchen. Daniel looked at the hand. He shook it. "My father." "Where did he study?" "He didn't. He taught himself. Then he taught 40 other people out of a 2-room school in Lagos for 31 years. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I've been playing this piece since I was 19. I've never played it like that." Daniel said nothing. "What's his name?" Marcus said. "Your father." "Emmanuel Okafor." Marcus nodded. He stepped back. he let Daniel have the stage, which is the smallest possible act of decency, and also, sometimes, the hardest. What happened in the following days began, as these things do now, with a phone. A donor at table 7 had filmed the performance from the second bar to the final note. She posted it the next morning with 3 words: "I was there." By afternoon, it had 40,000 views. By the next morning, it was on the CBC Arts page. By Friday, a producer from the National had called the conservatory's press office. By the following Tuesday, Emmanuel Okafor was the most discussed musician in Canada, which is a strange thing to become after 11 months of washing crystal stemware. But the world has a tendency to correct its oversights slowly, and then all at once. Patricia Huang gave one interview to the Toronto Star. She said, "I heard him play at 2 in the morning and I knew." Some people carry their gift very quietly. It doesn't make the gift smaller. It just means you have to be paying attention. Marcus Riley posted a statement on his professional page that was gracious and slightly longer than it needed to be, which is the specific signature of a man trying to get something right for the first time. He also made a phone call to the conservatory's programming committee that nobody reported on, which was the more important gesture. The video of the performance was viewed 4 million times in 9 days. The comments were, with some exceptions, about the feeling of being inside those 12 minutes which people tried to describe in the particular inadequate language of people who have just been reached by something they were not expecting to be reached by. Emmanuel Okafor was offered a faculty position at the conservatory in January. He accepted it on the condition that a portion of his salary would fund a scholarship for students whose families could not afford the application fees. The scholarship was named, at his request, for his father. The 2-room school in Lagos was still operating. A new teacher had taken over, one of Emmanuel's former students, now 30, who had come back to the east side of the city because she believed what Emmanuel had always said, that music did not belong to the institutions that claimed it. It belonged to anyone willing to sit on a second-hand pew and breathe. Every year, on the anniversary of the gala, Daniel played one piece in the conservatory's large recital hall, unannounced. No tickets required. Doors open to anyone who walked in off Bloor Street. He played the Revel. He played it the same way every time, not as a performance, and not as a memorial, but as the thing his father had always said it was. A conversation between what you have lost and what you still carry, between the music and whoever in that room needs to hear it tonight. In the photograph inside the pocket of his white dress shirt, Emmanuel Okafor is standing at the door of the 2-room school, squinting into a Lagos sun that set a long time ago. He is smiling. He has just heard something true. The shirt hangs now in Daniel's office on the 2nd floor of the conservatory, pressed and framed behind glass. Not because it was ever meant to be a relic, but because some things earn their place on a wall simply by being exactly what they were. A dishwasher's uniform that turned out to be the wrong word for what the man inside it was carrying. If you have ever been in a room where someone was invisible, and you were one of the 400 people who did not look up, this is the story that was happening 3 feet away from you. Every city has a Daniel. Every kitchen has a door to a stage. The question is not whether the gift is there. The question is whether anyone is quiet enough for long enough to hear it. What stays with me about Daniel's story isn't the applause. It's the 11 months before it. 11 months of washing crystal stemware in a kitchen. 3 doors from a concert grand he wasn't allowed to touch. 11 months of keeping his sleeves rolled, his head down, his gift folded so small it fit inside a breast pocket with a photograph. Most people, if they're honest, would have left after the first month. I think I would have. The kind of silence a room gives you when it's decided you don't belong there. That's not a silence you can reason with. It just wears you down until you start to believe it's the truth. Daniel didn't leave, and I've thought a lot about why. Part of it, I think, was integrity. Not the word we put on award plaques, but the quieter version. The version that means your behavior doesn't change depending on who's watching. Daniel played the Ravel at 2 in the morning in an empty recital hall with the same seriousness he brought to the Fazioli on Centennial night. Nobody was grading him. Nobody was offering him anything. He played because the music needed playing, which is exactly what his father had taught him. That's a kind of moral seriousness that doesn't show up on a resume, and it's rarer than we like to admit. Part of it was also the discipline his father had built into him over 11 years of 4-hour nightly lessons on a second-hand church pew. Emmanuel Okafor didn't have a conservatory. He didn't have funding or credentials or a studio with good acoustics. What he had was a method and the patience to repeat it. And Daniel had inherited not just the technique, but the understanding underneath it. That real skill is built slowly, in private, without an audience, until the day it's needed in front of 400 people. And it's simply there. That kind of prepared intelligence, the kind that comes from years of genuine work rather than performance of work, is what Marcus Riley heard from the wing and couldn't dismiss. You can tell the difference, even when you don't want to. And then there's the persistence. 5 years of not playing publicly, 2 failed attempts. A kitchen job that most people in his position would have experienced as humiliation. Daniel experienced it as proximity. He stayed near the thing he loved even when he couldn't fully have it, because he trusted that the right moment would come if he was still in the building when it did. That's not passive. That's a specific kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It looks like stubbornness, or settling, until suddenly it doesn't. Marcus Riley walked into the kitchen that night to protect something he thought was his to protect. What he didn't understand is that excellence doesn't belong to the institutions that houses it. It belongs to the person who built it, in private, over years, for reasons that had nothing to do with recognition. The moment Marcus tried to keep Daniel off that stage, he revealed exactly what he was afraid of. And Daniel, by saying almost nothing and simply walking out of the kitchen in a clean white shirt, revealed everything he'd spent 11 months quietly becoming. The room heard it. 400 people stopped what they were doing and heard it. That's the thing about keeping something real. When you finally put it in front of people, they know. They always know. I think about what Patricia Huang did. Staying late, forgetting her coat, standing in that corridor for 22 minutes. She paid attention. That's all. She just paid attention when it would have been much easier not to. Sometimes that's the whole job. Of a colleague, of a friend, of anyone in a room where someone is doing something true and invisible. You notice. You say so. You show up for the thing that doesn't have a publicist. Daniel's father used to say, play because the music needs you, not because the room does. I've been thinking about what I do, and whether I could say the same thing about it. Whether I show up for the thing itself, or for what the thing gets me. It's an uncomfortable question. It's probably the right one.